Ah, hello, dear friends, and welcome to part 10 of the 70 Mysteries of the Ancient World, unlocking the secrets of past civilizations, where we whisper read through this wonderful book exploring myths, legends, and key historical questions and comparing the geographical, archaeological, and historic evidence for them. Check out the other parts if you haven't yet. There have been some truly fascinating discoveries. And we start this part with the mystery of the Nazca lines. Around 100 BC to AD 700 in southern Peru. Here's a quote from Anthony Avini in 2000, and to put it simply, whatever it is, the message on the pampa may not be intended for us. The zoomorphic figures give me the gut feeling that the secret that lies within them is closer to Alice in Wonderland than Darwin's Origin of Species. So here is a view of a bird drawn on the desert at Nazca. So why did the Nazca people sweep away the thin topsoil to create figures that were invisible in their entirety on the surface? The Nazca people of southern coastal Peru were a confederation of minor kingdoms, farmer, fisherfolk, expert weavers, whose pots and textiles reveal a complex iconography. They lived on the fringes of the Pampa de Ingenio, a desert with all the potential of a fine sketch pad, and they swept away the topsoil of fine sand and small stones to form an intricate web of lines and figures in the white alluvium so large that they couldn't be fully viewed from the ground. High above the desert from an aeroplane, the lines, some as wide as an airport runway, are visible extended for kilometres across valleys and low hills. Others radiate from hubs, and some lines coalesce into giant birds, monkeys, whales, spiders, even plants. But those who created them never saw them in their entirety, so why then did people without aeroplanes draw such lines and figures? Here's a map of South America showing where the location of the Nazca is. The shaded area is the later Inca Empire. And here is a diagram of the various geoglyphs on the desert surface at the Pampa de Ingenio. There's lots of them. So a German-born mathematician, Maria Reich, fled Germany for Peru in 1939 and became a teacher in Nazca. And she soon became obsessed with recording and preserving the lines, surveying them over many years with a tape measure. She was convinced that the lines pointed to celestial activity on the distant horizon, while the animals represented constellations in the heavens. Till 1963, Reich worked almost alone. Then a tide of popular culture with its preoccupations with mysteries and occult phenomena flooded over the Pampa. Pseudo-archaeologist Eric von Daniken even claimed that the lines were runways created by ancient astronauts for their spacecraft. Well, the History Channel would agree. In the late 1970s, scientists realised that the Nazca lines were similar to ground drawings, often called geoglyphs, found amongst most of the Peruvian coast. Anthony Avini and Gary Ayrton have mapped over 62 ray-like centres and measured the orientation of 762 straight lines near Nazca, some up to 13 kilometres, 8 miles long. Avini plotted the orientations on a computer, found many of them lined up with the point on the horizon where the sun appeared during critical days in early November, when the annual rainwater runoff began to flow into coastal rivers from the Andes. The archaeologist Persis Clarkson surveyed over 1,000 miles of lines for cultural remains. She recovered thousands of Nazca potheads, traces of crude shelters, and a system of cairns that may have been markers for people walking the lines. Avini and his colleagues believed the Nazca lines were pathways maintained, swept and richly cleansed by local kins groups as an important part of ritual activity surrounding the arrival of water on the Pampa. The ray centres are concentrated close to the places where the water comes into the river valleys adjacent to the Pampa. Trapezoid cliffs lie on splits of elevated land between ancient steam beds. Perhaps they pointed to the direction of water flow. Everyone agrees that the lines played an important symbolic role in ancient Nazca life, but the precise significance of the animal and plant geoglyphs eludes us because we have no knowledge of Nazca beliefs. So throughout the Andes, mountain gods were believed to protect humans and control the weather. They're associated with lakes, rivers, and oceans, the ultimate source of both fertility and water. Local mountains always figured prominently in Nazca rain-making rituals because they're the source of water for the irrigation canals. The archaeologist Johann Reinhardt records how some rural churches and crosses in modern Bolivia Bolivia lie at the end of long ground lines. So, for instance, a sacred line leads from the Bolivian village of Sabia, where the headman makes offerings for rain each January. Here is a Nazca polychrome vessel. Pots depict mythic themes as well as animals, people and plants, and they're often painted against red or white backgrounds. The rich iconography behind the decorated pottery is lost to us, but that is beautiful as a piece. The capital at Calchi was a ceremonial centre adorned with mounds, plazas and platforms, so the great temple was a stepped platform, capping a natural rise and a plaza at the base. Another archaeologist, Elaine Silverman, has excavated a ceremonial centre named Calchi, a complex of mounds, cemeteries and shrines which faces outwards towards the pampa with its geoglyphs. The river adjacent to the site is almost never dry, a sacred place where water bubbles to the surface year round. Perhaps the lines were political, social and religious phenomena, deeply entrenched in the local world, and those who traversed them became transformed into ritual beings as they arrived at the sacred place, a transformation brought about by dance, elaborate costumes and masks. The mysterious Nazca lines will always generate controversy, but the latest research has pointed to a close connection between the lines in the desert and the life-giving water that nourished crops and people along the Pacific. Who built Tiwanaku in Bolivia in the 6th to 12th centuries? Caesar de Leon in 1553 says, Tiwanaku is not a large town, but it is mentioned for the large buildings found there that are certainly notable things to see. Near one of the principal lodges is an artificial hill built over large stone foundations. Further on from this hill are two stone idols in human form that are so large that they appear to be small giants. Near these stone statues is another building whose antiquity and lack of inscriptions is cause for not knowing who made such great foundations, nor how much time has passed since they were made. Here's a wonderful gold diadem mask with turquoise inlays from the Kalasaya complex and the reconstruction of the temple, a stepped pyramid with courtyards on the uppermost level. So the archaeological site of Tiwanaku, located in the high plains or Altiplano of Bolivia near Lake Titicaca, was one of the earliest ancient monuments in the Americas to capture the attention of the early European chroniclers. So by some accounts, even the great Inca emperor Pachacuti was impressed by the stoneworking of the ruins when he made a triumphal march around the region in the late 15th century. Legend has it that the emperor ordered stonemasons from the Tiwanaku area to Cusco, where they were to direct the construction of the Inca capital. Tiwanaku was the capital city of one of the great civilizations of the ancient Americas. The vast, planned urban center sprawled over the grasslands of the Titicaca Basin in the majestic Tiwanaku Valley. At its height in the 9th century AD, Tiwanaku was a huge concentration of people, surrounding an impressive architectural core of pyramids, palaces, streets, and state buildings. The city is dominated by a large terraced stone-faced pyramid known as Acapana. It's a large walled enclosure, measuring approximately 394 by 426 feet. And other buildings at the site include palaces, residential compounds for craft specialists, temples, and lower-class housing. Surrounding the architectural core of the capital was a hinterland of labourers and farmers who lived in adobe structures in dozens of villages up and down the valley. So the total urban settlement is estimated to have covered 4 to 6 square kilometres, with a population ranging between 30,000 to 60,000. The valley between Tiwanaku and the lake were also heavily settled. The combined population of these settlements and the capital itself would have made Tiwanaku one of the largest cities in the ancient world by the end of the first millennium AD. Here's one of the large monolithic statues standing in Tiwanaku. Isn't that amazing? And the detail of the Gate of the Sun, the central relief depicting one of the principal Tiwanaku deities, sometimes known as the Gateway God. So archaeological research in the Tiwanaku Valley and around the Central Andes provided a solid picture of the origins of Tiwanaku. The first period of human occupation recorded for the site is around 1500 BC, when Tiwanaku was one of hundreds of small villages that flourished throughout the Titicaca Basin. By the first centuries of the first millennium, Tiwanaku became one of 2 major political centers in the region. By the first centuries of the first millennium AD, Tiwanaku became one of the 2 major political centers in the region. To similar in scale and complexity at this time. Then around AD 350, Bukhara collapsed as a political centre and Tiwanaku continued to grow. By AD 500 it was the primary political power in the southern Titicaca Basin. By 650 the Tiwanaku peoples began to expand out of their home territory. They conquered the island of the Sun and the southern part of the lake and built the first regional pilgrimage centre there, continuing to expand throughout the area. By 800 Tiwanaku had established colonies up and down the entire Lake Titicaca area. We now understand how the Tiwanaku peoples were able to build one of the first states in the Americas in this harsh environment. They settled colonies in distant regions up to several hundred kilometers away to obtain obsidian, maize, and other products not available in the Altiplano. With the Lake Titicaca region, huge areas of lake edge swampland were converted to highly productive agricultural land through an ancient technique known as waru-waru. Waru-waru are fields of raised fields above the swamps that provide rich planting services. They are found throughout the Tiwanaku territory and beyond, providing the agricultural base of the Tiwanaku state. So, who built it? That's been a mystery for generations. It's one of a handful of ancient sites around the world that have spawned fantastic origin theories. So, early scholars asked how could a great urban centre flourish on the high, cold and windswept Altiplano when maize, cotton, fruits and other important crops can't be grown there? Who were the people that built this great centre? Were they immigrants from the south, as some histories suggest, or did the original inhabitants live there for millennia, build the Tiwanaku? The first European writers, seeing the statues found on the ruin site, talked about a race of antediluvian giants. The late 19th century scholar Arturo Poznański suggested that Tiwanaku was originally built on the Pacific coast 10,000 years ago and had since been geologically uplifted. By the beginning of the 20th century, some writers suggested that the Tiwanaku was the birthplace of humanity, the original Garden of Eden, or that it was Atlantis. Theories that Tiwanaku was built by Chinese immigrants, Vikings, and other abound in non-academic literature. Linguists typically or generally believe that the ancestors of modern Aymara-speaking peoples immigrated into the Tiwanaku area in the 12th century. According to these theories, the people who built the Tiwanaku spoke a now extinct language known as Bukina. Archaeological and place name evidence suggests otherwise and indicates that the Tiwanaku people were early Aymara speakers who'd been in the area for hundreds of years before Tiwanaku was founded. Like the great civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, Tiwanaku was built by the ancestors of the modern inhabitants of the Lake Titicaca region. Oh dear, well, we asked in the last episode or two, why did the Carthaginians sacrifice children? We're about to ask, why did the Incas do it in the 14th to 15th centuries in Peru, Chile, Argentina and Bolivia? Once, and this is from Father Bernard Cobo in 1653, once a 14-year-old girl was brought to this island to be sacrificed, but the chief attendant accepted her. In carefully examining her body, he had found a small mole under one of her breasts. For this reason, she was not considered to be a worthy victim for their god. Oh wow. Here is the mummy of a Inca maiden freed by avalanche in 1995 from the ice at the summit of Ambato Highland, Peru. And a modern-day maestro or shaman officiates at the burning of coca leaves and incense during a sacrifice ritual. So Father Bernard Cobo, who was an early Spanish chronicler of the Inca Empire, and tells us the story of a young girl brought to the island of the Sun on Lake Titicaca, which is now the Republic of Bolivia. She was to be sacrificed at the temple of one of the great pilgrimage centres and religious shrines of the ancient Andes, but she lived to tell her story to some Spaniards who arrived on the islands a few years after their conquest of the empire in 1532. Our information about the Incas comes from the early chroniclers such as Cobo, and from modern archaeological research we know that the Inca Empire was a huge multi-ethnic, multilingual state that stretched over 2,500 miles. The peoples who founded the ruling dynasties, sometimes in the 13th or 14th centuries AD, lived in Cusco, high in the Andes, the physical and spiritual centre of their world. In a period of a few generations, Quechua-speaking ancestors of the Inca Empire conquered scores of different ethnic groups, peoples and territories over this vast area of West and South America. Rebellions were endemic. Controlling the large expanse of territory and people was difficult, and as with other ancient empires throughout the world, state religion became a principal means of incorporating the disparate groups under their control and projecting the power of the ruling dynasties. Here is the detail of the silver female figurine found within the male mummy shown opposite. It's dressed in fine textiles and with a two-boot pin. Here's the excavation at the summit of Lufalaiko, where a female Inca sacrifice was found at the altitude of over 6,700 meters. So during the Inca Empire and for centuries before, Andean people built shrines at places called huacas. Huacas were any natural or humanly modified feature in the landscape that was endowed with spiritual power. Caves, springs, large rocks, hilltops, near fountains and bridges, mountain peaks, and the like. Sacrifices were common here. The most popular offerings were baskets of coca leaf, colourful marine shells, llamas, alpaca, maize beer, cloth metals, figurines, and occasionally children. Throughout the Cusco area, the early Incas built hundreds of shrines, each maintained by kin groups in the nascent empire. And as the empire grew, the state built larger shrines, such as that on the island of the sun. Temple complexes were dedicated to major huacas, the length of the Andes, to the sun, moon, thunder, and other gods. Substantial amounts of energy and resources were invested in developing a religion around the worship of these huacas, a magnificent temple emphasizing the political as well as ideological power that the Cusco nobility held over the lives of their subjects. So, of course, human sacrifice was an invention of the Incas. Pre-Hispanic Andean iconography is replete with images of sacrificed individuals, usually war captives. And in fact, some of the first carved stelae in Peru depict decapitated war captives. Other cultures took human heads as trophies as well. The Inca merely elaborated such practices as part of the state religion, an imperial ideology that welded the empire together. But it's in this context that child sacrifice must be understood. Children were sacrificed in a politically significant ritual called kapakucha. This term, according to Colin McEwen and Martin van der Kucht, translates as a royal obligation. So, they describe how children aged 6 to 10 years were sent from villages and towns from throughout the empire to the capital in Cusco. And for some time it was a journey of hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. And throughout the children and their attendants passed through villages singing as they walked in procession. Once in Cusco, the children were assembled in the middle of the city and were symbolically married by Inca priests. And after great sacrifices of animals and other offerings, the children were paraded around Cusco's great plaza. They were then sent back to their home villages and towns where new celebrations were held. And as the culmination of the ceremony, the children were drugged with alcohol and other substances and killed at a huaca associated with their homeland. Archaeologists found a number of child sacrifices throughout the Andes, and remains of these Kapakuka ceremonies are reported from islands, caves, and mountain tops. So Johann Reinhardt discovered sacrifices on snow-capped mountain peaks, often volcanic. The recovery of these sacrifices constitutes some of the most difficult archaeological work in the world. Reinhardt and his colleagues climbed peaks over 6,000 meters high and battle altitude, fatigue, ice, ash, and snow. So the determination of the ancient peoples to climb those same mountains without modern equipment is astonishing. And considering the mummies involve a combination of luck and skill. The skill comes from knowing where to look for the surface traces, and the luck lives in the right environmental conditions coming together to expose the bodies, so to recover the mummies before looters steal them or the weather destroys them. So Reinhardt and his team have to cut through ice and rock-hard soil, scientifically record their finds and transport the mummy back to their base camp safely. The chronicles contain descriptions of great ceremonies associated with the sacrifice of children, and now archaeological evidence from Ambato near Arequipa, Peru, indicates that the documents were correct. The Ambato maiden was a young girl buried with a magnificent feather headdress, pottery spoons, wooden cups, fully dressed metal figurines, food, and beautiful textiles. Red soil, a sacred colour, had been carried to the mountaintop to place in the base of her tomb. Platforms and possibly other buildings were constructed around the sacrifice area. There were several other children were most likely sacrificed as well. So compared with other empires in both the Old World and New, human sacrifice was relatively rare in the Inca state, but it did exist, and it served profoundly important religious and political purposes. For a local lord to offer his child was both a statement of loyalty to the Inca state and to the creator gods that they worshipped. The sight of dozens of children in a ritual procession to Cusco to be prepared for sacrifice, served as an annual reminder of the power of the Inca state. Only by understanding the political logic and religious principles of the Inca Empire in its historical context can we fully appreciate this tragic but powerful state institution. Wow, look at this mummy, the southernmost Inca mummy found at Cerro El Plomo. At an altitude of 20,000 feet, a child sacrifice accompanied by numerous figurines and a bag of coca leaves. It's actually brilliantly well preserved still. So sad. How did the Polynesians find their homeland? So 30,000 years ago to AD 1200 in the Pacific Ocean, Captain James Cook in 1769 states in these prose or pais, as they call them, from all accounts we can learn, these people sail in these seas from island to island for several hundred leagues, the sun serving them for a compass by day and the moon and stars by night. So in 1766, Captain Samuel Wallis and HMS Dolphin approached the island of Tahiti in a dense morning mist. When the mists cleared, he was astonished to find his ship surrounded by dozens of canoes manned by tall, well-shaped warriors. Tahiti soon became known in Europe as a distant tropical paradise, where the women were beautiful and poverty unknown, the home of human beings who were the epitome of the noble savage. But when a more sober observer, Captain James Cook, visited Tahiti in 1769, he puzzled over a question that has fascinated scholars ever since. How had the Tahitians colonized their remote homeland? How had humans with only simple canoes and no metal sailed across vast tracts of open ocean and settled on the remotest islands of the Pacific? Cook himself was in no doubt that the Polynesians had come from further west. He wrote prophetically, "We may trace them from island to island, quite to the East Indias." The great British navigator talked to a local canoe pilot named Tiwanaku and asked him how their skippers made their way to remote islands, far out of sight of land. Tiwanaku explained how they used the sun and the heavenly bodies as a compass. Here's the first settlement of the Pacific, which depended on the invention of seaworthy open-water canoes and the availability of easily stored foods. Seafarers were navigating some of the Melanesian islands as early as 30,000 years ago, but the offshore islands were colonized much later, within the past 3,000 years. Pacific navigators learned their craft from their elders at sea, both memorizing the movements of heavenly bodies and by using simple lattice charts showing islands and constellations. And here is a modern example of a Hawaiian twin-hulled canoe, the hokua. So interested in traditional navigation's taken hokua and other replicas on voyages along ancient canoe routes. So Cook marvelled at their ability to sail against the prevailing trade winds for hundreds of miles. Tiwanaku pointed out that westerlies blew from November to January, and that these were the months when canoes could make good progress to windward. Tiwanaku carried a mental image of Polynesia around with him. He listed islands, the number of days required to sail to them, their direction, which Cook made up into a rough sketch map. Modern scholars believe Tiwanaku could define an area bounded by the Marquesas in the northeast, the Tuamotus in the east, the Australs, Dubai to the south, and the Cook Islands to the southwest. Even Fiji and Samoa to the west lays within his consciousness a mental map of an area as large as Australia or the United States. Cook persuaded Tiwanaku to accompany him to the southwest to observe his methods. Unfortunately, Tiwanaku died of fever while Endeavour was in Southeast Asia. So no later explorers interviewed Tahitian navigators. Many armchair scholars assume the Pacific Islands had been colonised by canoes blown accidentally far offshore, but in 1965 English cruising sailor David Lewis encountered etched canoe navigators in the Caroline Islands of Micronesia. He learned how pilots used the zenith passages of key stars to navigate far from the land, as well as swell direction, waves that reflected off distant land, and even the flights of sea and land birds to make landfall on island archipelagos far from their departure point. Navigators were able to return to their homes safely, using the same signs of sea and sky. Determined to preserve a rapidly vanishing art, Lewis sailed his European-designed ocean-going yacht from Rarotonga in the Cook Islands to New Zealand, using only a star map and a Polynesian navigator to help him. In the 70s, Lewis apprenticed himself to the pilots of the Caroline Islands. Thus, speculation gave way to experimentation. In the late of ancient Polynesian canoes. And Finney's first replica was Nalahia, a 40-foot copy of a Hawaiian royal canoe. Tests in Hawaii's windy waters showed the vessel could sail across the wind, so Finney planned a voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti and back using a replica built from a composite of known canoe designs from throughout the Pacific Islands. Hokulea, designed by Hawaiian herb Kiwania Kane, is 62 foot long, with double hulls and 2 crab claw-shaped sails. Finney, Micronesian navigator Maupialag and a mainly Hawaiian crew successfully sailed Tokelua, Hawaii from Hawaii to Tahiti and back in 1976. This journey was followed by a 2-year voyage around the Pacific using only indigenous pilotage. Thanks to the successful experiments, ancient Polynesian navigational skills have been preserved for posterity, which is great. Here's a shrine in Polynesia where long-distance voyages began. At the same time, archaeologists and linguists have traced the ancient migrations across the Pacific, and a recent analysis of 77 Austronesian languages placed the ultimate origins of the Pacific Islanders in Taiwan, from where they island hopped through the Philippines and New Guinea, past east through Fiji, and from there down to Tahiti, Hawaii, New Zealand and Easter Island. It's a complex journey, estimated to take a little more than 2,000 years, a mere blink of an eye in prehistoric terms. And humans had settled in the Solomon Islands of the southwestern Pacific by at least 28,000 years ago. By 5,000 years ago, far-flung exchange networks transported seashells, obsidian, and other commodities over enormous distances from the Asian mainland deep into the Central Pacific. We can trace these people from their characteristic lapita pottery, where many have developed the Bismarck archipelago off New Guinea and found in the Far East as Fiji, dating back to the first millennium BC. The ocean-going double-hulled canoe, and easily storable root crops like taro were the catalyst for bolder offshore voyaging to islands far over the horizon, hundreds of miles apart. The achievements of the navigators were remarkable but not mysterious, given their pilotage system, passed from generation to generation. Micronesia and eastern Polynesia were colonized within the last 2,000 years, originating in Fiji by AD 1. Tahiti was settled by AD 800, Hawaii by 600, Easter Island possibly between 300 and 400, and New Zealand by 1000. With these voyages, the last chapter of the 150,000 year spread of modern humans across the world ended. It's fascinating, isn't it, how people can get that far? And speaking of Easter Island, here we have the statues and survival on Easter Island around 1000 to 1700, and here's Catherine Routledge saying, if people ask you if we have solved the riddle, you can say that we do not claim to have done that, but we have found much that is new and interesting. Of course, the fascinating Easter Island statues. Here's an engraving of a drawing by Dutchy de Fancy, the artist accompanying a French expedition to Easter Island in 1786. One of the expediting members is measuring a statue that still stands on its platform. The geography, geology and ecology of Easter Island, Rapa Nui or Rapa Nui, shaped the destiny of Polynesians who settled there at an uncertain date in the first millennium AD. Its watery isolation, combined with the impoverished landscape seen by European voyagers in 1722, seemed an impossibly barren stage on which to raise the majestic Moai, the stone statues. This gap between nature and culture baffled Western science for generations. Recent international scholarship, however, enriched the Rapa Nui archaeological database and revealed more of the ecological context. At the same time, linguists and physical anthropologists have contributed to new models of Polynesian origins and dispersal. Rapa Nui lies in the southern hemisphere, on the Nazca plate in the southeast Pacific Ocean, a dynamic focal point of geological tension and seismic instability. It's roughly triangular, basaltic high island formed by the coalescing flows of 3 undersea volcanoes. Rapa Nui is small, 163 square kilometres, but not the smallest of habitable Pacific islands, and geographically is isolated but culturally linked to the rest of Polynesia. It's a subtropical outlier in rainfall and temperature, produces a marginal local ecosystem, limited natural resources and patterns of slow plant growth or recovery, though there was once lush palm cover. Rano Raruki, a volcanic cone of consolidated lapilla tuff, assumed an important role in pre-contact Rapa Nui culture. So over the course of at least 500 years, this near-perfect founding ancestor of island society. I'd absolutely love to go here and visit these. They look absolutely stunning, so special. There is different types of statue amongst the 883 that have been inventoried on Easter Island, and they all fall into one of four body types. The tallest variant is an important variant of type 4, the tall one. So all Moai statues fall into one of four body types or shapes, and the proportionate relationships of design attributes are unvarying. It demonstrates proof of aesthetic continuity, uninterrupted social patterns, significant food management strategies, and political stability for multiple generations. So by the end of the 16th century AD, about a third of known Moai had been successfully transported and erected upon ceremonial platforms called ahu. Ahu sites along the Rapa Nui shoreline evolved into elaborate multi-phase structures with massive dressed stone walls capable of supporting numbers of statues, as we can see here. The Polynesians built massive sailing rafts and double-hulled canoes capable of long-distance voyaging. Their vessels were characterized by robust construction, flexible but tough lash joinery, and durable seaworthy design. Heavy timbers, some more than 3 times the length of the largest Moai, were successfully raised and moved over the rough terrain. Trained navigators set courses according to wind direction and adjusted to wind shifts and attended to the natural movement patterns of birds and fish. Early Polynesian movements in the East Pacific were underway by the first millennium AD, and discovery of Rapa Nui may have taken place between 300 and 400, but certainly by 800. Mangareva, Pitcairn, Rapa Nui's nearest neighbour, and Henderson were in sporadic but repeated trade contact from AD 800 to 1600. While the specific island of embarkation for the Rapa Nui settlement is not known, there are suggested archaeological affinities to Mangareva and to Mankaya in the Cook Islands. Monumental stone carvings in red scoria link Rapa Nui to Pitcairn and perhaps to Raivareve in the Austral Islands. Archaeological, linguistic and ethnographic evidence of Polynesian strategic voyaging in the East Pacific has, in the words of P.V. Cash, turned the tables on Thor Heyerdahl's theory of an American origin for the Polynesians. The increasingly convincing hypothesis is that they reached the vicinity of the South American coast where they acquired, perhaps in trade, the domesticated sweet potato and the lagenaria, a gourd. Subsequently introduced into pre-contact Polynesia, the sweet potato evolved into an invaluable food staple throughout the Pacific. In Rapa Nui, it was intensively cultivated in large plantations and household plots, fields and massive megalithic building projects that surpassed other staples of religious importance. Here are other statues carved elsewhere, on Easter Island and Eastern Polynesia, such as this one in Raivareve in the Austral Islands. So how did the Easter Islanders move and erect these giant statues? So there are 3 stages of production of this quarry: transporting and erecting. They required constant expertise, tools, cooperated work parties. So as estimates at the time when labour required to start the statue varies, but the first informed calculations were made by William Scrambridge, co-leader of the Mana expedition to Easter Island in 1913 to 50. He estimated that a master carver and a crew of 54 men using stone tools could carve a 30-foot statue in 15.5 days, but more recent studies suggest that double that time may have been required. Scrambridge excavated a statue was quality resembling a pound stone, keel, and then gigantic statues were invested in the slabs of archaeological source. Evidence of the Moai transport to 80 feet tall. Only 30 foot statue fitted his calculations successfully erected on the Hula. It's described for dry out of the island just off the top and between 8 and 10 tons. composed of lateral rungs spaced a metre apart and providing a surface over which a canoe can slide. And over steep terrain, rungs may be kept in place by lashing, becoming a rope ladder. A transport hypothesis based upon canoe technology was recently tested on Rapa Nui. A perfectly proportioned concrete replica of a statistically average Moai was laid on an A-frame sledge lashed in the form of a Polynesian outrigger canoe hull. 3 documented and replicable tests using levers, rollers, and a canoe ladder were conducted. Rollers were not viable, but using the canoe ladder, the replica was pulled with ease over level terrain, and then up a ramp to a replica ahu, and the sledge doubled successfully as a gantry to protect the statue and raise it with its accompanying headdress. Here is a real example of a statistically average Moai, and located and documented at Ahuakivi, and photometric analysis and laser scan produce an accurate 3D model for experimental use. Here is the supine statue in the quarry, the largest on the island, and the replica statue within inches of being set upright successfully. 40 people are required to pull the average Moai on an A-frame sledge over level terrain, and individuals can raise the same statue in 3 days. The average Rapa Nui chieftain required to carve, transport, and erect an average Moai and to feed everyone involved is estimated to have consisted of 8.7 extended families, or about 395 to 435 people. The resources resulting from approximately 50 acres of sweet potatoes and other crops supported workers, but Rapa Nui traditions say that master carvers required prestige foods such as tuna and lobsters. As long as the environment cooperated, the Rapa Nui social system and political structure thrived, and when larger than average Moai needed proportionately greater resource investment, economic decline based on resource depletion and slow resource regeneration resulted. If drought or cold descended for long periods, intense stress may have erupted into aggression. The role of the Moai in Rapa Nui society was both sacred and secular. They contained mana, the ancient Polynesian spiritual force, but also powerful tokens of successful cooperative food production, display, and redistribution. And today, many Moai once thrown down have been resurrected. They stand on restored ahu to represent the living faces of Rapa Nui ancestors facing the future and reminding us all of the past. That brings us to the end of this 10th part, and I've got 10th part of the 70 mysteries of the ancient world. Interestingly, it seems that our next part we will be tomb raiding with the tomes and lost treasures of ancient civilizations.